Hello, Master Gitu Yuwat. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. The International Monetary Fund says West Africa is upbeat about a good regional economic recovery. VOA's Ignatius Annor speaks to a top official at the I.M.F headquarters in Washington. A South African whistleblower faced a lengthy and costly legal battle to get her job back instead of being honored as a corruption buster. We'll have a report. And in the U.S. presidential campaign, Donald Trump defends the right of states to regulate reproductive rights, while President Joe Biden says decentralized authority threatens women's lives. We'll have a report. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The International Monetary Fund says Niger and Senegal are among sub-Saharan Africa's fast-growing economies due to their oil and gas resources. In its 2024 economic outlook for the region, the Bretton Woods institution says it is upbeat about a good regional economic recovery, but adds that growth has been more sluggish than expected. VOA's Ignatius Annor reports from Washington.
The I.M.F says a bright light lies ahead for sub-Saharan Africa economies after 4 years of weathering the storm. The International Monetary Fund, however, says with governments facing a financial squeeze amid high borrowing costs and future debt repayments, there's a risk to the region's economic outlook. Abebe Amro Selassie is the director of the I.M.F's Africa Department.
The good news is that there is some recovery taking place in the region. Growth was 3.4% in 2023, expecting to go up to about 3.8 this year, and a bit further to around 4% next year. Countries have had to live a lot more within their means. Institutions like mine, the World Bank, of course, stepped forward. Just to give you a small example, I think since 2020, the I.M.F has provided financing to the tune of $58 billion just to the sub-Saharan African countries. The World Bank has also been providing quite a bit of support as countries have not had access to markets in recent years.
Abebe says the emergence of natural resources like oil and gas in Niger and Senegal this year will spur a growth expansion of 10.4% and 8.3% respectively in these West African states.
The only thing that they have in common, as you said, is that both, it so happens, this year are going to have new oil production coming on stream. And that will bump up GDP the output numbers. We are also looking to see how we can support the government in Niger, and we're hopeful that we can reach agreement on we have a program that we're supporting under the Resilience and Sustainability Trust to help them address the climatic shocks. So we're hopeful that we can move forward in supporting them also in the coming weeks.
The I.M.F also notes the demographic boom in sub-Saharan Africa, but regrets that despite direct global foreign investments giving access to stable finance and job creation, sub-Saharan Africa is attracting only a mere 3%.
As important is domestic investment. I think too often domestic investors and by far the predominant role they play in driving economic activity is ignored. And in fact, foreign direct investors often come to invest in countries where they see domestic investors reaping a lot of dividends. I mean, there's important signaling in domestic investment itself being conducive.
As the I.M.F and World Bank emphasizes that badly needed reforms will require time to mature and deliver results, it is calling for international support and solidarity for economies in sub-Saharan Africa. The I.M.F estimates that nearly $70 billion will be needed as gross external financing for low-income economies annually. Ignatius Annor, VOA News, Washington.
The U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan says action is needed to address the growing crisis in Sudan. Tom Perriello told the Foreign Relations Senate Committee Wednesday that civilian groups in Sudan have been left to care for families trapped by fighting across the country. The U.S. diplomat who President Joe Biden appointed earlier this year pledged to work closely with the African Union and its partners to end the conflict and humanitarian crisis in Sudan. Perriello says punitive measures could deter governments and entities from supporting the two rival groups.
For the past year, the people of Sudan have suffered slaughter, crimes against humanity, sexual violence, ethnic cleansing at the hands of the Rapid Response Forces. The Sudan Armed Forces have bombed civilians and systematically violated international humanitarian law, blocking aid and harassing frontline workers. More than 8 million Sudanese people have been displaced, and 5 million are on the brink of famine. Yet the world has treated Sudan largely as an invisible crisis, rarely covered in the world press. And the Sudanese that I've met, including women and youth, regularly express their appreciation to this body and its members for the statements that have been made and the efforts to create pressure on both internal and external actors that are fueling this conflict.
The U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan, speaking at a Foreign Relations Senate Committee hearing on Sudan crisis. A meeting hosted by Kenya government officials in Nairobi recently focused on U.S.-Kenya relations in assistive technology to address inclusive education and employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. Among those in attendance from the U.S. Department of State was Sarah Minara, a special advisor on international disability rights, and she joins me here in studio. Sarah, you're very welcome to Africa 54.
Esther, it's so wonderful to be with you today.
Great to hear. You are in Nairobi for this very important meeting.
Yes.
Let's start off with one of the issues that I saw you talk about was to invest in disability inclusive entrepreneurship. What's that about?
Yes, I mean, what we don't realize is that 16% of our population are persons with disability. It's a big size of our population. We are, as a community, we are individuals that contribute, that have value, that are entrepreneurial, that are innovative. How do we ensure that companies, investors look at the disability community and say, we want to make sure we're allowing for you the space for us, for you to innovate and to create more opportunities for everyone else. And we actually visited Strathmore University that's actually focusing on disability inclusive entrepreneurship. And they have an iLab that's also focusing on disability tech. How do we take those models and bring it all over the world? Because we are a community that brings value to society.
You know, Sarah, one of the things I learned when I came to the U.S. is that the people here with disabilities are given privileges of some sort, and I would say it's their right. You get the buses lowered down to wheel in somebody. You have designated parking spaces. If anybody like me goes to park there, I'm going to get a fine, and a huge fine for that matter. What would you like to see governments, especially in Africa, where we didn't see that kind of thing happening, to give equal opportunities to people with a disability?
I look at it from a point of how can we break down barriers in our society, in our system, to make sure that we as a disability community can access society at large. What are the accessibility barriers, whether that's infrastructure, communication, technological, information, and even narrative barriers? Right now, Kenya is digitizing its entire government services. How do we ensure as they're digitizing their services, accessibility is part of their framework? Because if it's not, it will leave us behind. It will further marginalize persons with disabilities. So we need to understand all the barriers that the disability community face, and the disability community is also diverse, right? I'm blind, someone else is deaf, someone else, you know. How do we really bring that forward as we're developing services? How do we do that? Let's make sure persons with disabilities and the disability civil society is at the table as we design, assess, and implement government policies.
And talking of civil societies, yes, what did they tell you they want to see happening in Nairobi?
So a couple things. One, there is an amendment act to the disability policy that's been on the floor of Parliament for many years. How do we make sure that amendment act moves forward? It aligns to the Constitution and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but it needs to be adopted. The second, also there's a Kenya Sign Language bill on the floor that needs to be adopted and pushed forward. That bill allows for Kenya Sign Language to be an official language like any other language, for a mean of communication for everyone. Those are two important bills that need to be really addressed. And how do we ensure that OPDs, organizations, persons with disabilities, their voices are at the table when government are designing any policy as well?
Sarah, so meaningful discussions that you had in Nairobi, and thank you for sharing all of that with us. We hope to see them implemented. Thank you. Sarah Minara is a special advisor on international disability rights at the U.S. Department of State. Martha Ngoye was the legal executive at the South African state-owned passenger rail agency when she blew the whistle on unlawful government contracts worth millions. But instead of being honored as a corruption buster, she was fired by her employer and faced a lengthy and costly legal battle to get her job back. Martha's experience highlights the challenges faced by whistleblowers in South Africa. His son, Hafeje, has this report.
You know, psychologically as well, it's taken a huge toll psychologically, not only on me, on my daughter as well, and the family as well. But I've been fortunate because I've had a support structure.
While Martha continues the legal fight in court to get her job back, she has joined a newly formed civil society organization called the Whistleblower House, which offers support and advice to whistleblowers in South Africa. At times, whistleblowers have paid the ultimate price in the fight against corruption. In 2021, government employee Babita Deokaran was murdered outside her home after it emerged she had uncovered corruption in the provincial health department. Journalist Jeff Wicks spent months investigating the circumstances that led to her murder.
She was returning home after dropping her daughter at school, and when she slowed to move her car into her driveway, another vehicle pulled up alongside her and 3 men pumped her car full of bullets and she was shot 12 times. What we didn't know then, and we only found out subsequently several months later, was that in the weeks before she was killed, she had stumbled across anomalous payment patterns and had reported them to her superiors. She'd wanted an urgent investigation and a stop to the payments. And even just days before she was killed, she sent a message to her boss saying, these guys might be onto us if we stop their money and our lives might be in danger. And that message turned out to be fairly prescient because she was killed within less than a week.
Cynthia Stumple is another whistleblower who exposed corruption in South Africa's state-owned airlines. She says whistleblowers are a fundamental component in the fight against corruption.
My own view is that whistleblowers are truly important in fighting corruption because they are the ones who highlight and expose and speak out about either fraud happening in their workplace, corruption, and so they are that first point of call, and we really need to take them seriously rather than victimize them.
The South African government has acknowledged the importance of protecting whistleblowers. It has committed to reviewing the current laws on whistleblowers as part of its national anti-corruption strategy. Dr. Uglesha Radulovic from the University of Johannesburg researches the plight of whistleblowers. He says that changes are required to further strengthen the legislation surrounding the protection of whistleblowers.
So I think what would be crucial would be to revise the legislation, to broaden the protection for whistleblowers, and to penalize those that are retaliating against whistleblowers. And the second thing that would be crucial would be to create a stronger relationship between the state and civil society, and an independent state institution could provide the resolution there.
At the end of the day, it is important for whistleblowers to speak truth to power. If we really do want change in this country and we want to leave some kind of a legacy and future for our kids, people have got to speak out.
Whistleblowers remain an invaluable resource in the fight against corruption and the protection of democracy, but are currently not getting the support and protection they so desperately need. Isan Hefji, VOA News, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Nigeria is considering the introduction of state police across the country's 36 states as part of measures to tackle militant attacks, mass kidnappings and banditry activities that racked the country. The state police are an addition to the more than 3,000-member strong national police force who have been overwhelmed by the violence. Nigerians cautiously welcome the move. Kenya's President William Ruto and First Lady Rachel Ruto have been invited for a state visit by the U.S. President Joe Biden and U.S. First Lady Jill Biden on May 23rd. Mr. Ruto is also likely to address congressional leaders at Capitol Hill. For more on his visit, I'm joined live from Capitol Hill by VOA congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson. Catherine, there's a lot of excitement about the possibility of President Ruto addressing the Congress. But what's the significance of a non-U.S. president addressing congressional leaders? Catherine, can you hear me?
I can't hear.
All right. We'll get back to Catherine as soon as we're able to. Moving on. U.S. President Joe Biden has defended the right to protest but insisted that order must prevail as college campuses across the country face unrest over the war in Gaza. Speaking at the White House, Biden said the protests have not caused him to reconsider his approach to the war. Biden, a Democrat, has criticized Israel's conduct but continued to supply it with weapons. His rival in the presidential race, former President Donald Trump, on Thursday praised police officers who have cleared some campus protests. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has wrapped up his latest Middle East trip without any announcement of a ceasefire or hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Thank you, Blinken. Thank you, Blinken.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Wednesday in Tel Aviv with relatives and supporters of Israeli hostages still held by the militant group Hamas, a U.S.-designated terrorist group. Blinken is on his 7th trip to the region since the Israel-Hamas war was triggered by a Hamas attack on October 7th. He is in pursuit of a ceasefire deal that would free the hostages and bring about a pause in the war that has left nearly 35,000 Palestinians dead, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Blinken and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant visited the Kerem Shalom crossing into Gaza on Wednesday. Blinken said Israel had made important concessions to allow more aid to reach Palestinians and to reach a ceasefire deal. He said the world is waiting for Hamas to take the deal that is on the table.
Hamas has to decide whether it will take this deal and actually advance the situation for the people that it purports to care about in Gaza. There is no time for delay.
But after a packed trip to Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, Blinken left for home without any news of a ceasefire agreement. Observers had also been watching for a broader deal that would have involved normalizing ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia, possibly in exchange for a deal that would have ended the war in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he is not willing to end the war to get a hostage deal. And he said a planned military offensive into the Gaza city of Rafah, where at least 1 million Palestinians have fled, would happen whether there is a ceasefire or not. One analyst told VOA Blinken has not been able to achieve a breakthrough.
But I think the real holdup here is the fact that you've got an Israeli government led by Prime Minister Netanyahu that includes voices that strongly oppose a Palestinian state. And the Saudis have made very clear that they want to see a ceasefire in this war in Gaza as soon as possible, and they also want to see a commitment towards building a state of Palestine.
Katula said he was in Saudi Arabia last week and that there has been a lot of progress on a defense pact or other bilateral agreements between Washington and Riyadh, but not on a broader agreement with Israel. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Now let's go back to Capitol Hill, where VOA congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson is. Catherine, we lost you there, but there's excitement about President Ruto of Kenya coming to visit the United States, not only being honored with a state dinner, but also a possibility of addressing congressional leaders. But the question is, what does it take for a non-U.S. president to address congressional leaders at Capitol Hill?
It takes a very special relationship with the United States. It's an honor that's accorded to heads of state only 2, 3, 4 times every year. We, of course, just heard an address from the Prime Minister of Japan just a few weeks ago. But really, it is a special honor because, remember, they have to gather the entire U.S. Congress in that beautiful House chamber, the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, all the important dignitaries of the diplomatic community. It is really a special moment when you look at it. So a very important moment in U.S.-Kenya relations, marking decades of cooperation.
Catherine, we are going to leave it there because we'll come back to it soon, as soon as it comes. Thank you so much. Catherine Gibson, live for us from Capitol Hill. Now, still to come, reproductive rights is a hot topic right here in the United States during this presidential election year. We'll be right back.
World Press Freedom Day is here, and this year the focus is A Press for the Planet, under the theme Journalism in the Face of the Environmental Crisis. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we hear what environmental experts and journalists in Africa are highlighting as the issues at hand and available solutions in preserving our environment. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week. Right here on Red Carpet, we bring you the latest in
In other news, Britain has sent its first asylum seeker to Rwanda under a voluntary scheme, according to the Sun newspaper. The unnamed migrant was flown out of the country on Monday. The voluntary scheme is separate to a forced deportation program that Britain is about to embark on in the next few months, seeking to deter asylum seekers from crossing the English Channel in small boats to live in Britain. Now, fuel shortages in Nigeria have raised the price of gasoline and caused huge queues in cities like the capital, Abuja. The country is also grappling with high inflation and a cost of living crisis. Analysts say the price of basic food items would see a sharp increase if shortages persist. The U.S. state of Florida has a new law banning most abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. In this presidential campaign, Donald Trump is defending the right of states to regulate reproductive rights. Joe Biden says that decentralized authority threatens women's lives. VOA correspondent Scott Stearns has our story.
The Biden campaign is making reproductive rights a centerpiece of its re-election drive. Vice President Kamala Harris campaigned in Florida the day the state's new abortion law took effect.
This is a fight for freedom. The fundamental freedom to make decisions about one's own body and not have their government tell them what they're supposed to do.
Florida's new abortion law is among the nation's most restrictive and has prompted a November ballot initiative to put abortion rights in the state constitution. U.S. states are making their own abortion laws because a 2022 Supreme Court decision ended federal abortion protections. Trump appointed 3 of the 6 justices who decided that case, and Harris says voters need to hold him accountable.
across our nation, we witness a full-on assault, state by state, on reproductive freedom. And understand who is to blame. Former President Donald Trump did this.
While Trump says the new Florida law goes too far, he regularly takes credit for this state-by-state approach to abortion. It's the will of the people, he explained in a video on his social media site last month.
Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people. You must follow your heart, or in many cases, your religion or your faith.
At a women's health clinic in Fort Pierce, Florida, this patient fears the new law means more young women will die.
I think it means a lot more deaths, honestly, because 6 weeks is not really a lot of time. And then I feel like abortion, it's still going to happen, whether it happens legally or illegally. It'll happen like on the streets. It'll just be unsafe.
Clinic owner Candace Dye says there was a rush of patients before the new abortion law. For her, a 6-week ban is too restrictive.
And a lot of girls don't even know they're pregnant until they're 6 weeks. You know, they think they're 4 weeks because they haven't seen their period yet. So, and then we do our ultrasound and they're 6 already, and the patients have to be seen 2 different days.
Outside the clinic, anti-abortion protesters try to engage with each woman who enters. Tammy Holly shares her experience.
I'm here because abortion has hurt me, and I certainly don't want to see other women hurt by abortion. They walk in the door and they never come out the same. No matter how they try to go on with life as normal, they'll never be the same.
While ending abortion motivates many Republican voters, Trump appears mindful of the issue's political vulnerabilities in a close presidential race.
Always go by your heart, but we must win. We have to win. We are a failing nation, but we can be a failing nation no longer. We will make our nation great.
Harris says Trump's Republican allies in Congress want a nationwide abortion ban. Trump has said that's not necessary now that states can make their own abortion laws. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.